there's some very easy and effective ways to target some of the biggest walleyes in the lake. So I'm gonna get fishing and we're gonna dive into a bunch of tips and tricks to help you catch bigger fish. First thing that you need to do when you're looking to target big fish is to find the right type of lake, because a lot of lakes that hold walleyes don't necessarily hold big walleyes. And when I'm looking to target big fish lakes, I'm looking for relatively deep lakes and lakes that have some sort of cisco or smelt population, because those are forage base that grow big fish. That doesn't necessarily mean that those are gonna be the only lakes that hold big fish. One of the big tools that I like to do, I've talked about this a lot, is go onto the DNR Lake Finder app, or you can also use the Onyx Fish. I see they have it on there, and you can look up the different year classes that the DNR nets have surveyed, so you can see the different size ranges. And by doing this, you can really identify some of these lakes that have good potential for big fish. But I will say, like always, that is only giving you a little snapshot. That can be a pretty good indication. If you're getting some 28, 29, 30 plus inches in their nets, that's obviously going to signify some big fish. But I've also went back and looked at some of the surveys on some of the lakes that I have caught big fish, and every once in a while there'll be surveys that just don't show big fish. So it's not necessarily a guarantee, but that can be a good indication of some of the lakes to start to target. Once you've identified the lakes, now one of the first things that I like to identify some of the deepest parts of the lake. So look at the lake map, find the deepest parts, and then I look for adjacent points of interest. It might be humps, it might be points, it might be some sort of structure, maybe it's a weed bed, whatever it is, finding some of those points of interest that are close to that deep water. And I like to do that because those are areas where those fish are gonna move on and off that structure, go out, chase some of those ciscos, chase some of those smelt, whatever it might be, and move back onto that structure, or push fish on some bait onto that structure as well. Once you find that adjacent structure, then I kind of decide if I'm going to fish the structure or fish more of the open water stuff. And typically what I see when it's kind of that sunny, hot, calm, those fish kind of push off that structure and will kind of chase some of the bait, chase some of the ciscos, whatever it is, off in some more of that open water type pattern. When it's windy, they'll move closer onto that structure, or even in those early and late periods, they'll move back onto that structure. So identifying when to target the structure and when to target that open water is another big key. Now that you've kind of identified some of the areas, now what you're looking for is, whether it's with your side imaging, whether it's with your 2D, whether it's with a live scope, I like to target bigger single fish. One of the keys is whatever piece of electronics that you are working with, make sure you learn the sizes. You know, with the live scope, make sure you're using a similar scale, so that way you know what you're looking for. But a couple things you can look for. One, when you're looking for smaller fish, usually they're in bigger pods. That's not where we're looking for. If you're looking for some eaters, that's awesome. Look for those big pods of fish. You're typically gonna find some eaters. When I'm looking for bigger fish, I'm looking for obviously bigger marks, but also kind of off by itself, or maybe, like I said, in a group of one or two. A lot of times those active fish, you're gonna see them up higher off bottom. So finding bigger fish away from them, a lot of times up off bottom just a little bit. There was one. Got really tight to this guy. He is right on the edge of these weeds. That should get in front of him. I think he sees it. Oh, I think it bit. And I think it's big. Yep. I think it bit, and I think it's big. Oh, come on. I was seeing these two big marks. Ooh, in the weeds. Oh, come on. Be a big walleye. Oh yeah, that's a good walleye. Not a stud, not a freak, but solid fish. Ooh, got my heart pumping at least, because those are some good size marks. You can still see one out in the weeds over there. Ooh, he is a feisty guy. Oh, that is a good fish. Oh, this might actually be a little bit bigger than I think. It's kind of long and skinny. I did not think it was quite this big when it was in the water. I am gonna go put it on the bump board quick. 27 3/4 inches. Great fish. Well, you can see that guy was caught on smeltinator jig and a crawler. Just kind of working it through those weeds there. Another point I planned on making was don't be afraid of going into the weeds. As you saw, that fish that I caught, 27 3/4, that one was thick into the weeds, and there was another fish or two kind of milling around those weeds. But the big fish in the weeds can sometimes be a little tougher to see, obviously, so learn how to read some of those marks. I'll show you a few screenshots here of some examples of what you're looking for of those fish in the weeds. A lot of times those weeds are going to hold some of those schools of smaller fish, and so in the weeds still apply kind of the same rules. Look for singles, maybe doubles, maybe a group of 3, and look for kind of them to be spread out a little more and away from some of these pods of fish. Another thing I will say though is not all weeds are the same. I'm not going to dive into that today because I just put out a video where I talked all about finding fish in the weeds, what kind of weeds to look for. I'll put that link in the description here if you want to check that out. Ooh, another good fish right here. Rolling on bottom. Oh, did he see it? I think he sees it. It's a better fish too, I think. Try to just let it sit on bottom for a second. Try a little reaction bait on that one. Think he's gonna know what's up. Thinking about it. Didn't want that. Another tip that I'm gonna say is be efficient. You know, you're gonna see, especially if you had forward-facing sonar, you're gonna see a lot of fish. And if you're looking to target the bigger fish, sometimes you're going to have to almost hinder yourself. You're gonna have to almost hold back on targeting some of those pods of fish. You're gonna see a ton of pods of fish. You're gonna see a lot of fish in certain areas, but those are, especially when you're seeing those big groups, those are typically your smaller fish. Even right there, there's a group of fish right about there, and you know, we could probably cast a slip bobber on them, catch some fish, but those aren't the size of fish that I'm looking for, so I'm going to go past those. So making the most of your time, moving quickly, while also targeting very specific fish. What I typically like to do is I will keep moving from fish to fish to fish. Only fish a group of fish or a single fish for, you know, a few casts. If it's not active, it's not looking active. If it is looking active, I might go through a couple different variations on my presentation, but otherwise I'm gonna keep moving, keep looking for active fish. Along with being efficient is being efficient with your cast. So learn your cast distances. Even if you have to practice, just kind of go out in the middle of nowhere, or if you're casting at fish, just learning your distances. Being efficient with your cast can sometimes be the difference between catching a fish and not catching a fish, because these fish can be moving quickly or they can get spooked by the boat. I know what people are going to be asking, like, what bait should I be throwing? And I'll tell you what, I might not be able to answer that for you, because that depends on the body of water, that depends on the time of year. But what I'm going to say is throw your confidence bait. Whatever it is at the time, that changes for me throughout the year, that changes for me for the time of year, the body of water. Throw your confidence bait, because you are going to fish it confidently, you're going to fish it well. If you only get 1 or 2 chances at catching a big fish, you need to capitalize by getting a bait in front of it that you know can get bites. For me right now, a lot of times it's going to be a jig and crawler, kind of like what I have on right now. It might be a slip bobber if I'm chasing some fish that aren't moving a lot. A lot of times for me, it's some sort of reaction bait for big fish. Maybe it's some sort of glide bait, but something that's gonna get these fish to react. So most importantly, read the situation, know what you're confident in, and throw that. Save that, maybe that bait that you just saw on a TV show or on a YouTube video, maybe save that for a time where you know fish are biting. That way you can build up confidence in it. The thing that I will often do when I'm talking presentation is I will kind of work a little bit more finesse to aggressive. I'll start out with maybe a jig and a crawler or slip bobber, something that's not going to spook these fish, and I'll try that. If I see that these fish are, you know, not interested in that, then I will go to more reaction style bait, because if you do it in the opposite order, sometimes it'll spook that fish and they will not be willing to bite. Where if you do it finesse first, you can sometimes get a few baits in front of those fish. But there are definitely times where I want to work fast and I want to work aggressive, and I'm just going to be using reaction baits the whole time, because I want to get on a fish and I want to cast on it, try to trigger that fish to bite, and then move on to the next one. So now we're gonna talk just a few like gear things that can help you catch more fish. And one of the things that I'll do, whether it's with a jig or slip bob or whatever it might be, is downsizing your fluorocarbon leader. If you know, these fish are the biggest, smartest fish in the lake. So there's times where going down to a 6, sometimes even a 4-pound fluorocarbon leader can be very beneficial and can get you that bite that you're looking for. Because a lot of times when you're doing this big fish pattern, you are looking for 1 or 2 big bites in a day. and downsizing that fluorocarbon leader can definitely make a difference. Another thing kind of going along with that is just make sure your gear is set. You know, make sure your knots are good. Test them, pull them on them pretty hard because you don't want them breaking. Make sure your hooks are sharp. Always check your drag. Make sure your drag is set how you want it depending on the style of fishing that you're doing. And also make sure that you're having the correct rod, line, all of that for the presentation that you're doing. Obviously, the heavier presentation, the heavier rod, lighter presentation, the lighter the rod. And you know, when you are targeting bigger fish, you want a little bit heavier rod as well, although your rod is typically more for the baits that you're working as a part to the fish that you're chasing. Another couple tips if you want to catch big fish and you want to continue catching big fish is to handle these fish respectfully. You know, I know we're all going to want a picture. I know we want the hero shot. Trust me, filming and doing some of the content, I do just as badly. So if you want to catch big fish, you got to protect them. So that way there's going to be more big fish to catch later. And obviously going with that is to catch and release. You know, especially on these big fish, I'm not opposed to, you know, keeping a meal every now and again, but on these big fish, being able to catch and release and preserve some of these big fish, but also preserve our big spawners is gonna be super helpful. And my last tip for you is do not get discouraged. A lot of times when you're doing these bites, you're looking for just a few bites in an entire day, and they're gonna be big ones. So if this is new to you, or if you're just kind of trying it out, don't get discouraged. You know, you see a lot of people post on social media, big fish. You know, I'm just as bad as anyone. You only show the highlights, but that doesn't show you the hours and hours of going out and fishing and not catching big fish. Just like tonight, I was out here fished for a couple hours, caught one fish. So don't get discouraged. Keep trying, and I guarantee that this is going to pay off for you.